many other...
This is right, Arab.
Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Nick Harper, and in this bulletin we'll get you a roundup on the stories developing around the world. But first, the headlines. At least 50 people were killed in a bomb attack on a Shiite mosque in Afghanistan's Kunduz, in the latest violence to rock the country since the Taliban takeover in August. The UN Human Rights Council will appoint a special rapporteur on Afghanistan to probe allegations of violations perpetrated by the Taliban and other actors involved in the war-ravaged country. A day after the landmark court ruling challenging the legitimacy of EU law over Polish law, Poland's Prime Minister says the country wants to stay in the European Union. Philippines journalist Maria Ressa and Russian journalist Dmitry Muratov have won the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts to report on safeguarding freedom of expression. The United States staves off a credit default that could have sent the global economy into a tailspin. Washington's warring political factions agree to a stopgap fix to raise the nation's debt limit. Indian conglomerate Tata Group wins the Air India bid for $2.4 billion, ending 68 years of government control over the national carrier. Air India was founded in 1932 under the name Tata Airlines by Tata Group scion Jad Tata. We start today in Afghanistan, where there's been a bomb attack on a Shiite mosque in the city of Kunduz. At least 50 people have been killed and 90 others wounded in the blast. The attack took place during Friday prayers. The Taliban has called it a suicide attack. This is the latest violence to rock the country since the Taliban took over Kabul on August the 15th. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack yet. Graphic visuals on social media show bodies lying on the floor, people fleeing from the scene and frightened crowds thronging the streets. Kunduz is located around 7 hours away from the capital Kabul. Its location makes it a key transit point for trade with Tajikistan. Earlier this year, the city witnessed fierce clashes as the Taliban fought their way back to power in Afghanistan. The attacks have underscored security challenges for the Taliban. Last week, there was another blast on a mosque in the Afghan capital. The blast took place at the entrance of the Eidgah Mosque. It happened during a memorial service for the mother of the Taliban spokesperson, Zabihullah Mujahid. While there was no immediate claim of responsibility, the ISIS-K has carried out attacks targeting the Shiite community in recent years. Shiite Muslims make up roughly 20% of Afghanistan's population. Most of them are Hazaras, heavily persecuted by the Taliban. Well, for more on this, we can cross live to WION's correspondent Anas Malik, who's joining us live from Kabul. Anas, 50 people have lost their lives in this attack, many others injured. What's the latest situation where you are?
Well, Nick, the death toll seems to be increasing. Just before I went, before this live shot, just before we went on air, I got a confirmation that at least 60 people are now confirmed dead in the blast that took place earlier today in Kunduz, in the Imam Barga, a Shiite mosque, during Friday prayers. The Imam Barga, or the Shiite mosque, was packed with people, and the Friday prayers at the time of the blast were ongoing. A suicide bomber had managed to get his way inside the mosque, and then he had detonated. The reason we're looking at this carnage, at this increased number of people being dead in this heinous act of terror. While no group has claimed responsibility as yet, as we speak, there are indications that it can possibly be the handiwork of the Islamic State or ISK, which is an affiliate of the ISIL. The Taliban are on the ground. They are advising people to stay away. I've been speaking to local residents of Kunduz because it's in the north of the country, it's northeast of the country, and they have said that the scenes that they have narrated, it's gaury, it's heinous. You'd see it's gut-wrenching to say the least, the amount of damage that has been inflicted upon in Kunduz, on the residents of Kunduz, especially on a minority that is the Shia minority. Nick?
And what has the Taliban regime been saying about the blast itself?
Well, the Taliban, as we speak, they are yet to come out with a formal statement. They have said that, in fact, they have only confirmed the blast. They have secondly confirmed that their special units are there and they are investigating the matter. The local Taliban police chief, he has said that he is assuring security to the Shia minority, but it's a little too little too late, given that this act of terror has already taken place. We've been listening to the Taliban saying or advising people to stay away or to not gather in larger numbers, and we saw a repeat of that after the blast took place in Kunduz. But as we speak, with regards to the investigations, we're yet to hear a formal Taliban statement. But just to add a little more perspective, given that no group or no affiliate group has taken responsibility, but fingers are being pointed at ISK, which is an affiliate of the ISIL, which was which came into being basically in 2015 in Khorasan, which is part of the Afghanistan region. So that remains a big existential threat. The ISK remains a big existential threat for the Taliban. We've been seeing them attacking the Taliban in Nangarhar, in Kunard, even in Kabul as well. Just 5 days back, there was a big explosion here in the capital city of Kabul, and 5 days later, on Friday, during Friday prayers, we see this explosion coming in. A Taliban statement on this, with regards to the investigation, is yet awaited, but they have released an initial statement which has A, confirmed the explosion, and B, said that their fighters are there on the scene, but residents in Kunduz, the visuals that they are defining, to say the least, those are harrowing visuals that they are narrating to me. I've been talking to people on ground. There is a genuine sense of insecurity now, because the biggest USP that the Taliban had was security, which now seems to be challenged by these growing number of attacks. Nick?
Well, Anas, look, you mentioned a moment ago that no one has yet taken responsibility for this attack. We know that ISIS-K has carried out attacks and taken responsibility for them in the past. Any word who might be behind this latest attack?
Well, as we speak, there is no word from or official claim on the responsibility, but in all likelihood, it is the handiwork or of the IS. That is what fingers are being pointed out. In fact, Taliban officials off the record, they are saying that it can possibly be the work of ISK, because we understand that in Kunduz, around Kunduz, near Takhar and Badakhshan, IS has a concentration. Kunduz is the bordering province with Tajikistan as well. The Taliban has had a massive influx of their men, of fighters along that border of Kunduz with Tajikistan following that escalation. So this is a challenge for the Taliban to get a hold or to get a grip on the security situation. They've been trying to sell this to the international community that Afghanistan is far and much more secure after their takeover or after their quote-unquote establishment of the government, but their claim seems to have been punctured with the series of attacks that have been ongoing, and looks like it is going to be a long way, because with IS challenging and puncturing this narrative of security, or this USP of the Taliban that the country is much more secure, it is not going to be an easy ride out for the Taliban to ensure that sense of normalcy within the residents of Kabul or Kunduz or elsewhere, by and large within the country, that yes, it is now safe to step out. Nick?
Thank you, Anas. That was Anas Malik reporting live for us from Kabul. Well, next this morning, the US Senate has averted a major crisis by voting to extend the debt ceiling. In a historic vote, a legislation has been approved which will temporarily raise the federal government's $28.4 trillion debt limit and avoid the risk of a historic default later on this month. The development comes just 2 weeks before the 18th of October deadline. The Senate voted 50 to 48 to pass the bill following weeks of partisan fighting. The temporary measure raises the US debt ceiling to $480 billion. US lawmakers, however, will still have to address this issue before the new December deadline to avert a possible default. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has urged the Republican lawmakers to help in bringing a long-term solution to the impending debt crisis.
Republicans played a dangerous and risky partisan game, and I am glad that their brinksmanship did not work. For the good of America's families, for the good of our economy, Republicans must recognize in the future that they should approach fixing the debt limit in a bipartisan way. What is needed now is a long-term solution, so we don't go through this risky drama every few months. And we hope Republicans will join in enacting a long-term solution to the debt limit in December. We're ready to work with them.
So what is the debt ceiling, and why is it so important to raise the limit of the debt ceiling? Well, in simple terms, the debt limit is the maximum amount that the US government is allowed to borrow to pay its debts. If the amount hits that limit and the government doesn't lift the ceiling, the US would be unable to pay what it owes and possibly end up defaulting on its debts. In other words, the US government spends more money than it collects in taxes, so it borrows to make up for the deficit. Borrowing is done by the US Treasury by issuing bonds. But what happens when Congress doesn't raise the debt ceiling? Well, the US Treasury then takes up measures like suspending the sales of Treasury securities, suspending investments to compensate for the debt amount. Once all these measures get exhausted and monetary backing depletes, the government is then pushed to the edge of going into default. This, however, has never happened in US history. But what happens if the US does default? Well, the situation, if it ever arrives, would affect millions of Americans. If the US government cannot pay its bills, millions of Americans would be affected. US troops and federal civilian employees would not be paid. Pension payments would lapse, and Americans on food assistance would not receive any benefits. It can also trigger a global recession and the collapse of the stock market. Coming back to this successful debt ceiling increase, this historic bill will now be sent to the House of Representatives for approval before it can be sent to President Biden for his signature. This $480 billion increase, which would lift the debt limit to $28.9 trillion, is expected to be exhausted, though, by December the 3rd. December the 3rd will also mark the same day when most federal programs expire under a stopgap measure, which was passed earlier this month. Poland is a part of the European Union, but lately the country has been asserting its differences with the bloc. In the latest, Poland's highest court has called some articles of the European Union Treaty as quote-unquote unconstitutional. Well, this could potentially threaten the funding it receives and even membership within the EU bloc. The case was taken up after the Polish Prime Minister questioned whether the EU could stop Poland from reorganising its judiciary. It's being said that some EU treaty articles do not align with the Polish constitution.
The Prime Minister's application concerns the relationship between the treaty provisions and the primacy of the Polish constitution, and therefore it concerns Polish sovereignty.
In its ruling, the Constitutional Tribunal also said it has a right to check EU laws and even the rulings of European Union's Court of Justice. This indirectly challenges the EU to not interfere in Poland's judiciary. The bloc's Justice Commissioner has responded with a stern warning and vowed to react within a short time.
Confronted with a decision of the Constitutional Tribunal, we will react to reaffirm, I don't want to mention again, the main principles on the functioning of the European Union. And that's the goal that we have. We are guardian of the treaties at the Commission level, and we'll do what is necessary to try to have a correct application of the treaties. And so that's the main goal that we have. And of course we will do that in a very near future, because we received the decision today, but we will react, of course, in a short period of time.
Well, the past few months have seen a heated dispute between Brussels and Warsaw, ranging from courts and media freedoms to LGBTQ rights. The governing right-wing Law and Justice Party is prompting major changes, mostly conservative in nature. Critics have warned that challenging the supremacy of the EU law could jeopardise Poland's long-term future and also the stability of the EU bloc itself. One of the Polish opposition leaders has said that the government is heading towards Pole exit, a wordplay on Brexit. Apart from the political differences, though, there are other speculations that Warsaw is trying to put pressure on Brussels to accept the National Recovery Plan and aid programme aimed at helping EU economies shake off the impact of the pandemic. But the funding is linked to compliance with EU's law and democracy standards, which, for the moment, is not looking good for Poland. Because the country's government has been accused of politicising Poland's courts, and this goes against democracy, where the government and the judiciary are ideally two separate entities. Well, next today, Maria Ressa and Dmitry Muratov, journalists whose work has angered those in power in the Philippines and Russia, shared the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize. Ressa and Muratov were awarded for their courageous fight for freedom of expression in their countries. The committee said the award was an endorsement of free speech rights at a time when democracy is increasingly under threat.
Rappler has focused critical attention to the Duterte regime's controversial, murderous anti-drug campaign. The number of deaths is so high that the campaign resembles a war waged against the country's own population. Ms. Ressa and Rappler have documented how social media is being used to spread fake news, harass opponents, and manipulate the public discourse. Dmitry Andreevich Muratov has for decades defended freedom of speech in Russia under increasingly challenging conditions. In 1993, he was one of the founders of the independent newspaper Novaya Gazeta.
58-year-old Maria Ressa said that the prize shows that nothing is possible without facts. Ressa is a co-founder of Rappler, a digital media company for investigative journalism. Ressa and her company have faced multiple criminal charges and investigations for publishing stories critical to Duterte's policies, especially his bloody drug war.
I guess what this just shows is that that the Nobel Peace Prize Committee realized that a world without facts means a world without truth and trust. And if you don't have any of those things, you certainly can't conquer coronavirus. You can't conquer climate change. I've been saying this over and over, and it feels a little bit like, Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill. And when you get attacked in the process of trying to roll the rock up the hill, you just kind of dodge, you keep going. And it's a shock. But the fact that that a journalist from the Philippines and a journalist from Russia won the Nobel Peace Prize tells you about the state of the world today and the state of the Philippines.
Maria Ressa is currently on bail pending an appeal against a conviction last year in a cyber libel case, for which she could face up to 6 years in prison. Ressa and Rappler also focused on and documented how social media is being used to push fake news, harass political opponents and manipulate public discourse. She said that the honour would give her and her colleagues tremendous energy to continue their fight.
When you attack the media, oftentimes it's about shooting the messenger. We're trying to solve that in many different ways, but the recognition of how difficult it is to be a journalist today is for you, Rappler, and I hope energy for all of us to continue the battle for facts.
59-year-old Muratov is one of Russia's most respected journalists. He's been a Kremlin critic and is the co-founder of Russia's leading independent newspaper, Novaya Gazeta. Over the last 27 years, Muratov's newspaper, which is known for investigative reports on human rights abuses and corruption, has come under increasing government pressure. It's also been the target of cyber attacks, and 6 journalists of Novaya Gazeta, the highest number for a single Russian newspaper, have been suspiciously killed since the year 2000. The newspaper's reporter, Anna Politskaya, was murdered back in 2006. Her killing drew global attention to risks faced by Russians who dare to speak out against those in power. Despite the killings, though, Muratov refused to abandon the newspaper's independent policy. Muratov dedicated his half of the prize to the 6 journalists of Novaya Gazeta who lost their lives.
The impunity of human rights activist Natalia Estemirova certainly led to the fact that those who perform repressive maneuvers against Russian journalism think that they have powerful allies, Russian law enforcement agencies and authorities. If they could not solve the murder for 15 years, it probably means that they know but don't want to say. This is exactly how the impunity has affected our guild.
The Kremlin congratulated Muratov. President Vladimir Putin's spokesperson told media that Muratov is talented, courageous and committed to his ideals.
Здравствуйте, спасибо большое, что пришли. Наши европейские сыщики не смогли задержать киллера. Может быть, политического запроса на это не было?
Well, that's a wrap on this edition of WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. For more global news and updates, stay tuned to WION World is One.
This is right, Arab.